Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of NaPoWriMo, 30 Poems in 30 Days. If you're just tuning in, I'm Nancy Lynée Wu of Surprise the Line, going to be giving you a poem that has inspired me and a prompt built off of that poem. Then at the end, I'll share a little bit about the poet's influence on me as a writer. But really, this is a space to get you into the creative writing zone. If you want to sit down for a few minutes and speed up or pause the video at any point so you can make this prompt work for you. And as always, respond to anything in your writing that you want. It doesn't have to be exactly what I tell you. Just giving you suggestions, creative suggestions, as if we are in a Zoom room together. So let's go ahead and get started with day 5's inspiration poem, which is Diving into the Wreck by Adrienne Rich. Here we go. First, having read the book of myths and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade, I put on the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I am having to do this, not like Cousteau with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here alone. There is a ladder. The ladder is always there, hanging innocently close to the side of the schooner. We know what it is for, we who have used it. Otherwise, it is a piece of maritime floss, some sundry equipment. I go down, rung after rung, and still the oxygen immerses me, the blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down. My flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder, and there is no one to tell me when the ocean will begin. First, the air is blue, and then it is bluer, and then green, and then black. I am blacking out, and yet my mask is powerful. It pumps my blood with power. The sea is another story. The sea is not a question of power. I have to learn alone to turn my body without force in the deep element. And now it is easy to forget what I came for among so many who have always lived here, swaying their crenellated fans between the reefs. And besides, you breathe differently down here. I came to explore the wreck. The words are purposes. The words are maps. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. I stroke the beam of my lamp slowly along the flank of something more permanent than fish or weed. The thing I came for, the wreck, and not the story of the wreck, the thing itself and not the myth, the drowned face always staring toward the sun, the evidence of damage worn by salt and sway into this threadbare beauty, the ribs of the disaster curving their assertion among the tentative haunters. This is the place, and I am here, the mermaid whose dark hair streams black, the merman in his armored body. We circle silently about the wreck, we dive into the hold. I am she, I am he whose drowned face sleeps with open eyes, whose breasts still bear the stress, whose silver, copper, vermeil cargo lies obscurely inside barrels half wedged and left to rot. We are the half-destroyed instruments that once held to a course, the water-eaten log, the fouled compass. We are, I am, you are, by cowardice or courage, the one who finds our way back to this scene, carrying a knife, camera a book of myths in which our names do not appear. Okay, so that poem was very different in tone, I think, than most of the poems I've been sharing in the last couple of days. But I'll speak a little bit more about that at the end of the video. And this is a fairly dense, intellectual, sort of slower toned kind of poem. It's basically a conceit poem, all the way through, diving into the wreck of history, really, just to give some context, just in case the poem is it's a little cerebral, So imagining diving into the wreck of history, specifically the history of, you know, um, women and um, Adrienne Rich was an activist and a feminist. So, just to put that poem in some context as we get into the prompt for here. Oops, I forgot to change the name. Okay, skip that. This is Diving into the Wreck by Adrienne Rich. Okay, so for this poem's inspiration prompt, Diving into the Wreck by Adrienne Rich. Um, Thinking about this world that she's entering in the poem as the speaker, I just want to invite you to brainstorm on this idea of a world that you are exploring these days. And right before you do that, if you want to remember our mantra in your own mind, I am here and present with my experiences. I am grounded and open. I have unlimited access to an infinite flow of creativity always around me. Whatever happens on these pages is what's meant to happen. I'm not judging myself or my writing, I'm just writing. I have everything I need to begin already inside of me. I'm settling in and I'm ready to write. Once again, I share that mantra because when we get into the writing process, sometimes it is a process of excavation and diving into our subconscious. So we want to give ourselves enough freedom to explore honestly with ourselves, whatever we want to explore today. So think about what world you're exploring, what ideas, attitudes, beliefs, new concepts, old concepts. What are you being challenged by? What are you questioning? What are you thinking about? What paradigms? What topics? Are there habits or behaviors that you are practicing or entering or resisting? So anyway, I just, think about jotting down for a few minutes some ideas of what different sorts of worlds you're exploring today. Pause the video and then come back when you're ready. Okay, step 2. So maybe you have some ideas of what you're thinking about these days. I want you to choose one world of ideas from your list to explore to give your poem some focus. Imagine that this world of an idea exists in a physical location. So this is part of the practice of poetry, bringing abstract concepts into the sensory world of description. So, thinking about a metaphor you might want to create, where is this location for this idea? What goes on there? How do you get there? For example, thinking about the poem, the example poem, if history is built into this metaphor of being underwater where there's a shipwreck, there's a ladder that goes down. So, we see in Rich's poem, she really builds out the metaphor through these concrete details and descriptors. So just think about exploring, allowing your mind to imagine what this world of an idea might look like, feel like, sound like, all of that. Just a little stream of consciousness and come back when you feel done. Okay, so this is just a quick one from the world that you are exploring. Just a quick bank of images on the page. Anything that either wasn't in your free write that comes to mind, or that you want to pull from your free write to make sure you remember, sounds, textures, objects. What does it feel like? What creatures live there? Just a quick minute. Okay, welcome back. Putting it all together in your poem. This is the part where I recommend you go ahead and give yourself a good amount of time. My default's always 20 minutes, but you can do more or less. So here you go. Write a poem imagining that you, as the speaker of the poem, are entering this world that you are creating. Think about the threshold. How do you get there? I think that's an important thing to think about when we're crossing worlds, and especially when we're trying to enter a new world or re enter an old world, like the ladder. So, what do you see when you get there? And is there anything you bring back? Any, what, whatever your mind wants to go, put yourself in that location of this world, of this idea. And as always, use any sensory imagery to bring the poem to life, but also keep in mind how declarative statements can be really powerful amid sensory imagery, as in Rich's declaration that the words are purposes, the words are maps. So allow yourself to, be declarative if you want, and think about maybe framing the poem as an action. So going into this world maybe is your focus, like this idea of diving into the wreck. If you are entering this world, what would that motion look like? Just as a jumping off point. If you want to go in any direction your poem takes you, as always, feel free. But see if you can launch yourself into this prompt with with that idea. So go ahead and write, and happy writing, happy exploring and excavating. There's a lot of ideas I know we're always thinking about. So go ahead and see where this takes you. If you feel like coming back to chit chat about Adrienne Rich, then I'll be here. Okay, well, welcome back if you are tuning back in from your writing. And I want to talk a little bit about Adrienne Rich, because this is one of those poems that hasn't left me since I first read it in high school. I was probably 16 or 17 years old. I was in, an AP English class where my teacher, Mrs. Hall, even though I think she remarried since then, this was so long ago. Mrs. Hall, if you ever see this, thank you for assigning me Diving into the Wreck by Adrienne Rich. So this is Rich's National Book Award winner. And this poem, Diving into the Wreck, was from 1972. So thinking about that being almost 50 years ago, I know some of you out there remember this time because you were living it. I was not born yet, and so I learned about it as history, the second wave of feminism from the 1960s to the 80s that Rich was very much part of as a poet and writer. So Rich was very much a feminist, and let's start at the beginning. Okay, she was born in 1929, and she lived until 2012. Is considered one of the preeminent, feminist poets of that era. And starting out, she won the Yale Younger Poets Award in 1951 with her first book. So that's pretty incredible. I read the younger poets, these of today's age, and they're always so phenomenal. So if you don't know that series, definitely check it out, Yale Younger Poets. So according to her biography, the early work of Rich was formally exact and decorous. I love that phrase, exact and decorous. So I take that to mean, even though I haven't studied a lot of her other work, she evolved from, say, the technical formalism of craft into what we see in this book as a sort of looser style, but still intellectually, strong poetry, where she actually intentionally was working non-poetic language into her poems. And this is during the era when the second wave of feminism slogan was the personal is political, which I think is still true. So thank you. Thank you for mothers for that. And, you know, she was writing during the Vietnam War era, and she was very much outspoken, anti-war. Uh, she won a bunch of awards. Like, I'm not even going to list them. All these poets so far that I have brought have won all the big awards. What I think is interesting is that she actually did not accept the National Medal of Arts Award, which is a presidential award. This was during the Clinton era. And she said she understands it's incompatible for her to accept this award with the cynical politics of this administration. And she said, art means nothing if it simply decorates the dinner table of the power which holds it hostage. So I love when poets meet at the intersection of poetry and politics. Clearly, Rich, like many of the poems I've been sharing, were very outspoken about the politics of the age. Um, you know, she also has some of these great quotes I want to share, that the problem of defining happiness in an American society that continues to exploit its most defenseless citizens in the face of a larger world where contempt for human rights leads to nightmare. Okay, wow. It's like, yes, let's not forget that human rights is still an issue and we are still fighting for it. And I want to thank Adrienne Rich for her leadership and her words that are resonating through to me, a woman in 2021, 50 years after she wrote this book, and almost a decade after she has passed away. This is the power of poetry. I am going to be bringing in more contemporary poets, but I do want to honor these poets that have personally influenced me. I remember reading this book and being so confused at 16. But the reason why this poem has stuck with me all these years is because I think the metaphor is so strong. And, when we think about political poetry, a lot of political poetry has specific references, but sometimes it doesn't. This poem has no references of the day, right? So I can read this poem from 50 years ago and I can see my current world in it. As a woman, I'm still diving into the history and excavating. Almost every woman I know is doing that. If you consider how recently women have had certain qualities and rights in the United States, as well as generally in this global transformation we are experiencing. Anyway, thinking about this radical feminism that Rich is putting forward, which I'm all about. So obviously I'm sharing it because I'm about it. Um, I think it can be something worthwhile to think about creating and through poetry these metaphors, which is the language of our subconscious, which is the language of our collective conscious, which is what feeds politics and society. So that's where poetry can tap in to that vein of archetypal understanding in the human brain through one reader at a time, right? So I think that's very interesting. Yesterday, or by the time you see this video, on Saturday, we had a guest workshop with Surprise Line. By the way, if you're new, we do have live workshops you can join at surpriseline.com. But we had a guest teacher, Arthur Kizakian, who is wonderful, doing a workshop on the art of body snatching in poetry. And we were thinking about and talking about building on the traditions of the poets who came before us. And it's like this big conversation we're all having across space and time. Like, you can write a poem inspired by Rich's 1972 book and have it be relevant. So you are having a conversation as well as I'm having a conversation with these poets through their work. I just find that to be wonderful and fascinating and seemingly obvious, but I think when we think about how time and space work, it's interesting to see how we're connecting across the years. And so this is influential to me thinking about I'm not just writing for myself or for people today. I really hope my goal would be that if I can write something that reaches someone 50 years from now in the way that Rich's poems have reached me, I mean, what an incredible feat that would be. So, just something for us to be thinking about when we're writing. Of course, we're writing here just to generate and have fun and explore and self discovery. But when it's time, or if it's ever time to go to publish, thinking about your poems as something that can be truly gifts to the reader later, sharing your wisdom, sharing your voice. This idea of diving into the wreck is that there are certain voices, and it's not just women, but Rich is speaking specifically about the female experience throughout history as not being written into the stories. I'm thinking of the hero's journey and conquest, and how even like the Odyssey and the Iliad were these great epic stories that influenced Western culture, and they were basically telling boys to go to war, and conquer. Like that's the main narrative that I think our society sort of still operates on. Of course, there's subcultures and alternative viewpoints, and that's where we are in the space, what I'm talking about, and these ways of approaching these dominant narratives to subvert them through poetry. Not that you have to. I'm not telling you to do that necessarily. I am simply observing on what Rich and many other poets of her time were doing. She shared the book award with Audre Lorde and oh my gosh, somebody else who was very important. Alice Walker, yes, The Color Purple. She shared it with Alice Walker this year that she got it. So there's all these women, there still are, and I just want to give a shout out to my sisters out there, that are doing the work, the internal deep excavation, as well as the public political activist work. And shout out to men who are supporting women in their lives, and non-binary folks who are teaching us about that experience. I am so fascinated. Then one of the other poems I'm going to be sharing is me learning about this idea of two-spirit people. Anyway, we're all learning. We're all learning. And I wanted to just make a mention. I am writing and speaking from my perspective, so I'm not ever intending to like leave anyone out from the conversation. There's so many conversations to be had, so many poems to be reading. I would love if anyone else feels inspired by this challenge, poets out there who have read what you have read, who have learned what you have learned, who have the experiences that you have. Doing this sort of thing is not super crazy hard. You know, I just put it out there. If anyone wants to share in any format on any platform in any media, this sort of thing. Talk about what has influenced you, what poems have shaped you. This poem has lived inside my body for 15 years. I write constantly into the archetypal world of diving in, thinking about going into the depths underwater where things are murky, we can't breathe, it's a different environment. And that's what's amazing to me about this poem, Diving into the Wreck. This world she creates that is familiar because we understand the ocean, while at the same time it's adventurous, maybe a little bit dangerous. Can't breathe, humans can't breathe underwater, but there's something that we need to see down there. It's like we need to keep diving in there into the subconscious through whatever avenues you use: poetry, meditation, prayer, journaling, therapy, whatever it is. There are riches, no pun intended, but there are treasures down there. I even personally have been using this metaphor a lot, thinking about diving into a pool, into the subconscious. I'm thinking about Persephone, and the myth of the underworld. There's a lot to be discovered down there. And as poets, I think that's kind of our playground. So, anyway, thanks for playing on day 5. I'm going to share a quote from Rich to close us out here, because I consider myself to be an optimist, but this quote really makes me think. So, Adrienne Rich said, I began as an American optimist, albeit a critical one, formed by our racial legacy and by the Vietnam War. I became an American skeptic, not as to the long search for justice and dignity, which is part of all human history, but in the light of my nation's leading role in demoralizing and destabilizing that search, here at home and around the world. Perhaps just such a passionate skepticism, neither cynical nor nihilistic, is the ground for continuing. So I love that take on skepticism. And I would call that quote super hope punk myself, just because we know how bad it is and we feel and we see what's happening, doesn't mean we can stop fighting. So it's the grounds, whatever grounds you have for continuing the search for justice and dignity. Well, let's keep finding it, everyone. So thank you again for joining me on day 5. Happy writing, and I'll see you tomorrow.